Shall we continue? Okay. Yes?
Dr. Ghaly, just a question before you move on to recent developments. I just want to go back to your first claim that medical ethics started as soon as there was a relationship between the patient and the physician. And
Yes.
the question is, do you differentiate between medical ethics and bioethics, or do you see them as both, the same?
I do. I do. Because when you add the bio, then you get into the modern period. Because bio was not there. It was medicine. Biology and genetics and genomics and all the omics, new things, this is new. This is a new thing. I will speak about this now when we move. So I would say medical ethics for the pre-modern, bioethics for the modern. Sometimes they don't make this differentiation. In my writings, I do that. Whenever I say medical ethics, I mean the pre-modern. Yes. So now we will speak about the recent developments. Of course, historical developments do not happen abruptly. So it's not a year that we say in that year a big shift happened. It's usually a matter of graduality. But we can say that the 20th century, more specifically the second half of the 20th century, big things happened in medicine, and they would have great impact on the field of medicine, or medicine as an art or science, and consequently on the ethics regulating this field. In the 20th century, and of course as reaping the fruits of previous research, as I said, it's a continuity, a matter of continuity. In the beginning, we could only see the body from outside. We cannot see inside. And we speak about organs, الأعضاء الحاكمة, the chief organs, the subsidiary organs, stuff like this. So they would say the heart, the liver, the stuff like this. But we speak about what we see. We can look into the body, inside the body after death, through dissection, when we study the dead. But how the body works while the person is living and we look inside, we cannot. We have to do guesswork most of the time. By time, we started to get inside, starting from the stethoscope. You will hear the body inside without putting your ear on the body. So you start to be at distance and knowing what's happening inside. And by time, we have the X-rays and all this stuff. These are important developments which will make difference later on, because we will have the concept of what we call evidence-based medicine. We are not doing guesswork anymore, but we see with our own eyes, whether these eyes are these eyes or the eyes of the microscope or whatever mechanism that we use. This will increase the level of certainty in the information. And when you move from probability to certainty in results, the ethical reasoning will be different. Yeah? Another important development is that we are not talking about the organs anymore, but we are looking at the body at the molecular level. With genetics and genomics, we realize that, I always say to my students, the metaphor of printed file and the digital file. Imagine that the paper you have, this one, the one with red colors, that you have this, and then there is one of the mistakes. Like, for instance, the creation has a Z at the end, creations with a Z. It's wrong. And we want to correct it. I can take a pen and take out the Z. Okay? Let's imagine that this was the body that we had, the printed one, the organs that we can see and touch. If I corrected the Z with my pen and then printed the file again, I will see the same mistake or not. I will see the same mistake because I did not correct the original one in the computer. What I corrected is the printed one. So I have a disease. We could treat the disease, but my children will have it. Why? Because of the genetics that they inherit. We didn't know that there is a digital file in the computer, and we couldn't have access to it. Now we do. We know that we look the way we look, not because of the organs, but because of other things at the molecular level that made these organs look what they look. Because of the DNA, there is the DNA, the digital version, the letters that are making us what we are now, at least physically. There are some statements that can be controversial, that not only physically, but even morally. We act the way we act because of the genes, the genetic determinism and genetic reductionism and all this stuff, but at least physically. In the 20th century, especially in the second half of the 20th century, 1953, when Francis Crick and what's his name? James Watson and Thomas Crick discovered the structure of the DNA. So they had access to the file inside, the DNA, which is making us what we are now. By the beginning of the 21st century, we could decipher the whole file in the DNA, the whole genome. We could sequence it, we could read it. And we had the book of life, as they call it, which tells us about history, about our present, and even about our future and our children and offspring, etc. These are huge developments that happened in medicine, which will have its own impact on morality and moral thinking. For instance, the genes, how are we going to judge them? What is the moral standing of the gene? Is it an organ? If we say yes, it is an organ, it means if we have a gene mutation, then I am sick. Because the gene is not okay. But the gene is not yet expressing the disease. We discovered the gene mutation, like for instance, the gene mutation of Huntington's disease. If you have the gene mutation, almost 99%, you will get the disease when you are 40 or 50. You spend the last 10 years of your life, great suffering, and then you die. It's untreatable, it's incurable. And we can know that once you are born. The one who has the gene mutation of Huntington's disease, is he sick? He's healthy, he's okay. Maybe he doesn't even know that he is sick. So if we say that the gene is an organ, so the mutations hitting the gene, are they diseases or not? So then they are not organs. So they must have a different moral standing. If I have a gene mutation which will affect the my prospective children, whether it's recessive or not dominant, I don't want to get into these technicalities. There are some genetic diseases that it's enough to have one copy from the parents, and sometimes you need two copies. Let's imagine now one copy only from one of the married couple. I have this gene mutation which will be passed possibly to my prospective children. Should I reveal this to my future wife or husband or not? Because we have chapters in fiqh about العيوب التي يفسخ بها النكاح, the defects which will give the right to the other partner to dissolute marriage, to terminate marriage, even if this is a man or a woman. And you have to reveal these. And some of them, they speak about الضرر الذي يتعدى إلى النسل, the harm that goes to the forthcoming generations. Can we do that or not? This all happened because we have now the genetics and the genomics. So we have a new world of medicine, and we will have also a new world of medical ethics, which they usually call now bioethics. In order to approach these topics and these new questions, what kind of sources are we going to consult? And I mean by we here, religious scholars and ethicists and the Muslims who will try to approach these new topics. Again, three main sources, still the Quran and the Sunnah with disciplines around it, etc. The tradition, taqleed, that has been built throughout history. But the biomedical sources changed and the philosophical sources changed. In the biomedical, we don't have the Greek tradition anymore, which was available in Arabic. Now we have the Western tradition, which is not available in Arabic. We can say, if we can call pre-modern medicine Islamic medicine in the civilizational sense, not in the religious sense, we can call the modern medicine the Western medicine. Even if you are a Muslim, you are practicing medicine in a Western way, the Western medicine with its own tools and concepts and values, whatever. So we have Western scholarship not available in Arabic, and the philosophical, we have now a branch, distinct branch called bioethics, especially from the 1970s onwards, and with chairs, with departments, with professors. You have huge number of professors who have a chair in bioethics in the West. So the philosophical in the pre-modern, coming from the Greek, it's now bioethical coming from secular ethics. The problem is the following. The first type of source is the religious, when it comes to the Quran, Sunnah, and the disciplines around them. There is a decline in scholarship. There is stagnancy, jumud, in the fiqh, in theology, etc., recognized by both Muslims and non-Muslims. Even jurists themselves complain that things are not as good as they were in the past, etc. So you have a decline in one of the key sources, in the rigor of scholarship in them. And in 2 and 3, they are expanding and increasing in power. Medicine is not only interfering in the human body with the same limited scope as it was in the past. The scope of medicine is increasing day in, day out. Can we imagine that in a specific moment in history, when I want to get married, that I will ask a physician before I get married? Usually I don't. I ask my parents, for instance, if I'm a good guy or a bad guy, whatever. With the modern nation state, sometimes you have restrictions within the modern. But I will not go to a physician to tell me that this wife is good or bad for me. This is not his work. Nowadays it is. And in a country like Qatar now, and in almost all Arab countries, you cannot have marriage certificates without doing premarital genetic test screening. You cannot. Your marriage will not be made official. One of the conditions. Why? Because you have high frequency of genetic diseases. The married couples pass them to the forthcoming generations. In order to protect the coming generations, we force those who are going to get married to do the screening. The results of the screening are not binding. So the state tells you, you have to do it to know. Yeah? So you have to know not only the printed version, your body, but you have now to know the digital version. You have to know about your genes, not only about your organs. And then these digital versions will tell you what will happen possibly with your future children. And the decision is yours. But you have to know. This is medicalization of marriage, or geneticization of marriage, something new. This is a new authority and power for medicine to judge us. Not to mention, for instance, issues like mental disabilities. If we judge someone as crazy or not crazy, with normal mental health condition or not, usually it was for the society. Now you have parameters. universal standard parameters. You go there, and then you measure you are or not. Then medicine is coming into that, and so on and so forth. So many things are now judged by the field of medicine and its new forms of genetics and genomics. The main problem is that 2 and 3 are expanding in power and scope, but the knowledge of the religious scholars about 2 and 3 dramatically shrank. So the knowledge of the religious scholars about sources number 2 and 3 in the past were much better than they are now. You remember the phenomenon of the jurist-physician, physician-jurist, etc., this transdisciplinary system of education. Now, in the age of modernity and post-modernity, we have specializations, sub-specializations, etc. So I studied at Al-Azhar University, religious education. Once I finished my preparatory school, this is grade 8 or 9 in the international translation of these things. I stopped having anything to do with science. I didn't study any subject related to science because I want to specialize in Sharia studies, etc. Then you have to follow the Adabi track. So since I was, I think, 15 years old, I didn't do anything with science. And the same for everybody who wants to study Sharia at Al-Azhar University. You end up having knowledge about Sharia, but not about these things. I remember when I wanted to study, I was interested in bioethics, I didn't know even what's the difference between gene and genome and cell and organ and molecule. I didn't know these things at all because I never studied them. So you start from scratch if you are interested in doing this stuff. Add to this the language barrier. These things are not in Arabic. People who specialize in Sharia, they do their stuff in Arabic, not in English, not in French. So there were big challenges in the modern time and how to do the stuff. So it's not anymore that you can do it. This is fiqh, and then you fill it in with the questions related to medical ethics, and this is theology, you fill it in. It doesn't work like this. These disciplines are not thriving as they were in the past. The people who are experts in these fields are not anymore, do not have any more access to the knowledge in the sources number 2 and 3, so things became a chaos and quite problematic. With things started in some of my research. In the article I showed you, I sent to you, I found a fatwa issued by Rashid Rida 1910, where this realization from the questioners, from the common Muslims, started to come up. That the questioner is asking him a question related to medicine and says to him, this is a question for you and for your friend who is a physician. This is something completely new. You don't go to a religious scholar to ask him and his friend. You go to the religious scholar to ask the religious scholar to give you a fatwa. But the questioner knows that Rashid Rida, it doesn't matter how knowledgeable he is in religious sciences, but he is not in medicine. And in order to have a good answer, he has to understand the question, and he cannot understand the question without external support, etc. This was 1910, not to mention after genetics and genomics, etc. We have some jokes about religious scholars who thought that the egg, which is eicel in Dutch, the woman's egg, they thought that this is the egg from a chicken. Speaking about البيض, the eggs. So it looks funny, but it's dramatic. If you don't understand the word itself and what it means, you can imagine what kind of fatwas you can have. So this can be quite problematic. To solve the problem, we changed the whole method. So the whole method lived as an individual. From an individual who is asking the question to an individual religious scholar who will answer the question to the end product, which is an individual fatwa. And then if I'm convinced, I implement it. If not, then I go to another religious scholar and so on. Till I get convinced this is more or less what I believe the will of God, so I have to do it. It becomes my moral obligation. So things changed and became like that. So instead of having the question going to one, it will go to a group. And this group will have people from different backgrounds, not only religious scholars, but also scientists, biomedical scientists, physicians, etc. People who can understand what the question is about and what is at stake exactly. So before you can give an answer, you have to understand the question. Who will explain to you the question? You cannot do it yourself, so you need someone who will help you. The whole article I gave to you is about that. One of the roles of the modern Muslim physicians is to work as co-mufti, to help the muftis and to inform them about the questions they are asked. So we will have at the end a collective fatwa. So we moved into an interdisciplinary discussions. Mainly two groups, biomedical scientists and religious scholars, and mainly within the religious scholars we have jurists, fuqaha. They try to bring the puzzles together in order to create a picture and to understand what exactly the issues at hand. They would sit together on the table in order to understand the question and to come up with a collective fatwa. These things started in the 1980s. Of course, the perception that religious scholars cannot do the task alone started much earlier, started in the first half of the 20th century. But it became institutionalized in the 1980s, end of the 70s, beginning of the 1980s. And when it comes to bioethics in particular, we have three main institutions that have been doing most of the work when it comes to modern Islamic bioethics. The Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences in Kuwait, established 1984, got this official name 1984, but they started 81. The Islamic Fiqh Academy, Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami in Mecca. The International Islamic Fiqh Academy, Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami al-Dawli in Jeddah. As you see, the three organizations are all based in the Gulf region where we are now. But these are not Gulf institutions. They are transnational institutions where almost all Muslim countries are represented. And most of the time, also countries with large Muslim minorities, like India, for instance, are always also represented. And sometimes also European countries with large Muslim populations are also represented there. How does it work in these institutions? So the work on the disciplines themselves stopped, more or less. So fiqh is not growing, theology is not growing to accommodate these works. It's a theme by theme approach. So Dolly is cloned. We have a big question about cloning and human cloning. So we will have a conference about cloning. We bring theologians, jurists in order to discuss the issue. We have a big question about stem cell research. Then we will organize a conference, bring the people and study it together. So it's not that bioethics is still dispersed in the different chapters in theology and fiqh and adab. No, it became more or less by time its own genre or its own field even. This will create some problems because when you extract the old discussions from fiqh and theology and cook them in a new thing, you will have some metamorphosis. Things will change. Sometimes you are aware of these changes, sometimes you are not aware of these changes. This is also another challenge that the people will see. But this is how it works. So they have a topic. And then they will ask the biomedical scientists to write papers for the general public. So they will say to the scientists, these papers will not be read by physicians, by scientists. So try to be as simple as possible. Most of the time, these papers are written also in Arabic or in English, and then they will be translated into Arabic. And then distributed among the religious scholars. These papers will give the information to the religious scholars about the question. So what is cloning? What are the possible benefits and harms of cloning? So they will inform them and enlighten them about the issues at hand. And then religious scholars, after understanding the question, they will write their own papers about the Islamic perspective. How should we look at it? How we should judge it from an Islamic perspective? Once they have these papers, before the meeting, then they organize the meeting. So they send the papers to everybody, not only those who wrote the papers, but the other participants in the conference, and they come together. Everyone will present his paper shortly, and then they have the discussion. Mutual discussions are a very interesting piece of information for people who do research on these meetings. The good thing is that 2 of the 3 institutions, they publish also a script of the oral discussions. So you have not only the papers, but the oral discussions. So you will see what happens among the religious scholars themselves, what happens between the religious scholars and scientists, how they try to influence each other, how power relations work, etc. Very, very interesting pieces. And then they try to come to final recommendations. Usually, when they publish the proceedings of the conference, it's like 1,000 pages and sometimes 2,000 pages and sometimes more. But the recommendations are usually 1 or 2 pages. So they try to squeeze the whole discussions about specific points upon which you have either consensus or majority agreement. Most of the time, they want to come to a unanimous agreement. Sometimes they do not succeed. If the disagreements are very big, they will reconvene the conference again. For instance, there are some issues which are not clear. Then they will ask some scientists, some religious scholars to write separate papers on these controversial issues and then come again. And sometimes, if there is a clear majority, they will vote. And then the vote of the majority will count, and the others not. If you have a really big issue and you think that this is impossible what these people did and this cannot be accepted, etc., you can write your name that you disagree with this or that point. And sometimes you can even explain why you disagree. After the meeting, they disseminate the final recommendations. They have websites. Sometimes Al Jazeera cover and other media outlets, they cover what they do, and they publish the full proceedings. The weakest part in this whole process is the last one, what happens after the meeting. So for instance, if you want to get the publications of these institutions, I would wish you very good luck to do that. I'm here 6 years now. I didn't get the list of publications yet. And I'm here in Qatar, it's just Kuwait, here next door, a country. Very difficult to get for many reasons that we can speak about in other contexts. But it's not easy to get. Many times their websites are down, especially the organization in Kuwait. You get frustrated when you try to find this information, but the quality they produce is impressive and very good. I judge this as a researcher. If you want to study the works of the religious scholars individually, and then you see their work when they are in the context of these institutions, it's always much higher. Even if the 2 pieces are written by the same person. This is an individual, and this is as a paper submitted in the conference. It seems most of the time they do like peer review or stuff like this, so they don't accept everything. So they do a good work. These are some of the photos of the people who participate. These are scientists. So here, on the left side, this is Abdurrahman Al-Awadi, the president of the organization in Kuwait. Next to him, Siddiq Al-Awadi, one of the famous geneticists in the Arab world. She's from Kuwait. Mohammed Ali Al-Bar, originally I think from Yemen. He's a Saudi physician, internist. And here at the bottom, at the left side, Dr. Haitham Al-Khayyat from Syria. Hassan Hathout from Egypt is a gynecologist and pediatrician. And Ahmed Al-Gindi, pharmacist from Egypt, who is the secretary assistant of the organization in Kuwait. And these are some of the photos of the religious scholars who participate often. At the left side, this is Taskhiri from Iran. and then Abu Ghudda from Syria, Qaradawi living here in Qatar from Egypt, Al-Khalili from Oman, Mohammed Naim Yassin from Jordan, Qaradaghi living here in Qatar from Iraq. So as you see, you have people from different countries, also different traditions, some Shia, some Sunnah, some are Ibadi, they think also differently. Some of them are known as easygoing scholars, others are hardliners, etc. So you have different brains sitting together. Sometimes this makes the deliberations difficult, the process, but it makes it well representative of the different trends in schools of thought which are present in contemporary Islamic tradition. And these are their publications of these institutions. So the one in Jeddah, they have their own journal in which they publish the proceedings of their meetings. And the one in Mecca, they have also their own journal. And the third one, they publish books, edited volumes, the one in Kuwait. For those who are interested in Islamic bioethics in general, I always recommend this work, the International Islamic Code for Medical and Health Ethics. It's one of their publications, but they published it in 2005. One part of this book is about ethics of research involving human subjects. And the other part is summarizing the positions adopted by all these institutions on all topics discussed till 2005. So you have a very good summary of the positions adopted on so many topics in the field of bioethics from an Islamic perspective. So a very important reference work for people who want to have an idea. And it's also translated into English. It's available in Arabic, etc. Most of the publications of these institutions are unfortunately available in Arabic only. The question I want to raise here, when we have these institutional collective discussions, does this mean that the old individual approach came to an end? So no individual religious scholars speak anymore about bioethical issues because they don't know and there are no scientists, they are not scientists, they don't know about science? The answer is no. Still, the individual approach is still working, but most of the time informed by these collective discussions in the institutions, or even contributing to. So these scholars who participate in these meetings, they submit their own papers. Sometimes in the meetings, they will have an idea that my paper, I can develop it into a book, but the book will be published in his own name, not in the name of the institution. Sometimes he will submit his paper, and the paper and his position will not be adopted by the majority. But it can be his own individual opinion, so he will publish it as a fatwa, as a paper, as a little book, in his own name, not in the name of the other religious scholars and other scientists, etc. So the individual approach didn't die, and it still goes on. And sometimes the individual approaches challenge the collective. And they would say the Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami or Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences, they didn't hit the right button when it comes to this point or that point. We have this. It's not very common, but we have it in the discussions. Because these institutions themselves do not claim that their opinion represent the Islamic position. It represents an Islamic perspective, but not the Islamic, not the only one. It is a one. It's authoritative. It has a good appeal because it comes after intensive discussions, involvement of religious scholars and biomedical scientists, people from different schools, etc. So of course, there is rigorous work before we come to these conclusions. But they do not have a binding authority. Because they themselves sometimes disagree with each other. For instance, when it comes to brain death, two of the institutions accepted brain death as death, but there is one which disagreed. So if their opinions are binding, they wouldn't disagree with each other because it would have been accepted by the others. So these are the recent, an overview of the recent developments. So we have pre-modern medical ethics. We have modern or contemporary bioethics. Each of them has its own system, its own sources, its own epistemology, its own products, its way of approaching information into it. And both of them interact and play together when we discuss any of the modern issues that we discuss today. I choose the topic of beginning of human life in order to show how these things work. But now that we covered both the early and the modern developments, if you have any questions, we can take some questions before. How many questions do we have? Okay, so if like three, yeah, 4. Okay, I will try to be as concise as possible before we open the questions for everything.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Mohammed. So with regards to the positions that these organizations come to, can we sort of take them, can they be exported to other countries, or does each country really needs to come away with its own ijtihad and its own position on an issue?
Most of the time, the recommendations are meant for everybody. Sometimes they leave themselves the details for the specific context. Like for instance, when they speak about abortion, they would say before installment like this, after installment like this. But what about rape? What about? They would say this is left to the legal regulation of each country. Sometimes they are criticized because they are, how do you call it? They are too much focusing on Muslim majority context, not taking care of the Muslim minority context. Specifically the topic of milk banking, human milk banks. They were criticized for this, and that's why the European Council for Fatwa and Research issued a fatwa which disagreed with the position of the other organizations in the Muslim world about that. Because they said, okay, it can work for Muslim majority countries, but not for Muslim minority countries. So it depends. Yeah, but they themselves, they mean for Muslims in general, specifically those in Muslim countries. In the reception, sometimes there are differences.
What about, for example, where there are new issues coming through in other countries that may have not to become quite populous here? So, for example, in Australia, we've just had a second state that's legalized euthanasia. And eventually, I mean, with the way it's going, it'll become the whole country. But I don't know that they've really spoken on this topic. And what about, for example, the obligations owing on the physician and pharmacists like myself, for example, who may need to supply these things, but they're not really in accordance with our values?
Yes. No, they do not answer, they do not give fatwas, the regular fatwas for specific situations. They discuss topics and themes. They discuss topics and themes. So the specific fatwas for a specific context and individuals, that's not their work, most of the time. I wanted to say something, but I forgot. But anyhow, I answered your question now. Yeah? Yes, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ghaly. My question, only one question, and it's coming from not someone in the field of medicine, but someone who's studying philosophy. So wouldn't you say a more fundamental moral dilemma or issue that a Muslim today should try to deal with is the fact that maybe modern medical, even Muslim practitioners have kind of secularized the conception of the human being. In the past, all these authors that you mentioned, they understood a man in an integrated fashion, body and soul. But today, this is no longer the case. So wouldn't you say this is a more urgent moral question? Thank you.
Thank you so much. In the example I chose, beginning of human life, I will focus on this issue about the soul and the significance of the soul. I was at the University of Osnabrück in Germany. I gave a lecture on insouling bioethics. How, if we put the soul on the table, many things will be different now. But I will touch upon this topic just now. Yes. Yes, please.
Thank you. I was wondering if there's still time to elaborate on the question of power relations, authority, and influences. Speaking of medics vis-a-vis religious authorities, but also authorities trying to place the role of Islam within medical ethics. And then as a third actor to that question, also international organizations. I believe I saw the logo of the WHO on one of the papers. How do they use their international relations and power in relation to bioethics in Islam?
Thank you. This is a very good question. I think I detailed this in the paper that has been sent to you. This power of knowledge negotiations. The original idea was, I, as a religious scholar, do not understand the question. You, as a scientist, you explain the question and full stop. So normally you come on the table to explain what the question is. That's it. But you don't participate in the judgment to say this is Islamic, un-Islamic, moral, immoral, because this is my work as a religious scholar. This was the idea. We divide the tasks, you give information, you give the informative component, I give the normative component. I judge. What happens in reality is that this does not hold because of the very nature of medicine. Sometimes the religious scholars expressed their frustration that physicians keep interfering in their work, that they try to push the discussions into a specific direction. Like, for instance, in the beginning of Human Life, the one who was chairing the concluding session, which will draft the recommendations, was Sheikh al-Qaradawi. And he complained that two physicians in particular are making too much noise throughout the conference by pushing into a direction that life starts by day one of pregnancy. Although everybody, including other physicians and the religious scholars, think differently, they insist that the final recommendation should be into that. So you see here how physicians can be influential, even just two physicians, because what I feel is that your significance and seminal contribution in the conference does not have only to do that you are a physician or a religious scholar, but how knowledgeable you are, what kind of techniques you use for convincing the others, etc. So it's a very complex process. So the authority of the physicians go much beyond the medical information they provide. Mainly, first and foremost, because of the very nature of modern medicine. Science is not value neutral. Science is not value neutral, and we have so many studies now about that, even from Western perspective. Good science is the science that studies and explores important questions. We don't study every single question, the important questions. What makes a question important is not the science. We, as a society, we judge that this is important. Here, for instance, in a country like Qatar, huge investments in diabetes. Why in diabetes? Because you have huge percentage of the people, especially those older than 40, they have diabetes. So I, as a country, I decide this is what my people are suffering from. This is important. So you will see physicians and scientists working and writing research and getting fund for this. Worldwide, it is the same. We have this famous 10-90 percentage. 10% of the diseases receives 90% of the international budget, because these are the diseases that hit the rich people who can pay the medicine. So if I, as a pharmaceutical company, when I try to develop medicine, I should think of the customers, those who can pay the medicine that I will develop, because it's a very time-consuming and very expensive process. So that's why malaria, for instance, is still not treated, because it's not hitting the people in the developed countries. And we have seen so many things. Pandemics, when they are in Africa, you don't have studies. When they move to the US or North Europe, the studies will start. because these are the people who can afford the money. Science is not value neutral. Science, the scope of science is not only about a disease and treating the disease. It's about the conception of what makes us human. What are we? What is important for us as humans? So these physicians are part of their medical culture in the modern time, in the age of modernity. So they go beyond the traditional medicine. These religious scholars, their last knowledge about medicine goes back to the Arabic translations of Greek medicine. So they will say, oh, but this is not medicine. Yes, this is not the medicine that you are aware of. But modern medicine is not like that. So you have all these difficulties. And although they may share the same religious conviction, they are both Muslims, maybe the same religious tradition, Sunni or Shia, both of them are practicing Muslims, etc. But coming from a different field dictates also the way you think. Like, for instance, interfamily marriage, consanguinity. You will see the physicians mentioning risk marriage, الزواج الخطر, because there are genetic risks. Religious scholars would be very angry. Say, how come it's halal? إنا أحللنا لك أزواجك وبنات عمك وبنات عماتك. Something which has been declared clearly in the Quran that is halal. How come you describe it as risk marriage? So you will think that these people are not practicing Muslims, they don't understand the religion, but it's all because of the fields and the disciplines we come from. These are all difficulties, and I hope in the article I gave to you, I explained that. Yeah? Yes?
So I had a question about related to medical research and drug trials, and more specifically with regards to the issue of consent. And I'm not sure like what is the current position when it comes to physicians asking patients to participate in drug trials that could potentially be beneficial. So there is no 100% certainty that this is treatment.
Yes.
And how is the issue about the impact of the religious perspective comes into play into ensuring that the patients or the participants in the study are not unduly influenced to take part in such studies?
Yes. The publication I just showed, this one, this one, International Islamic Code for Medical and Health Ethics, half of it is about research in ethics of research involving human subjects. Half of the book, detailing all these issues: consent, privacy, confidentiality, even in the case of pregnancy, pregnant women, children, minors, adults, all this stuff. So it has been extensively discussed in this regard. And generally speaking, informed consent is a must. They concluded from a religious perspective. Why from a religious perspective? Our capacity towards our bodies is not the capacity of the owner. It's not like in secular bioethics. We have the capacity of a trustee, mu'taman, over the body. God entrusted us with this body, so we shouldn't do any harm, etc. But this capacity of a trustee entitles me to decide about my body, because I am the one who will stand in front of God to be entitled to answer the questions: what did I do with my health and age, etc., in the hereafter. So I am the one who decide about it, not anyone else, not including the physician. Yeah. So my opinion should be considered. My opinion should be considered. There were some debates about women, for instance, if they can decide, or their husbands can decide, etc. And if you read Western books on bioethics, most of the time they will say, take care, because in the Middle East they don't have this autonomy, and women do not decide for themselves, their husbands should decide, etc. Which is not always the case, I have to say. And according to these discussions, women should decide about their own bodies, because there is wilaya ala nafs and wilaya ala al-jasad. There is authority over the body and authority over the self. They make distinction between that, and that authority over the body is not shared by someone else. So I decide about my own body, whether I bachelor, am married, etc. Unless there are things which are combined. Like for instance, I will do something which will affect my work, and I am the one who is affording the costs of living in the family. My decision is affecting everybody, not only myself, but my wife, my children. So you should consult in this regard. But the general principle is that everybody decides for his or her own body, and there is no difference about man and woman in this regard. They explained all these details about this and how to consent children and assent and consent and all this stuff mentioned there. Yes?
In the paper, you elaborated, or it was elaborated, on the transplantation of male sexual organs.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate some more on the transplantation of non-sexual organs like kidneys or livers, and what your opinion is on that.
Okay. If you like, we can continue with the questions and skip the applied example, because we are all in the applied examples now. Are you fine with this, so that I don't mistreat your questions, that I give them proper time to discuss? Is this fine?
What was your example before we
Beginning
started?
of human life.
What was the, we have to
Beginning
make
of
that
human
decision.
life and abortion and this stuff. Yeah, yeah. So anyhow, transplanting organs, the discussions started in the 1950s. We have a fatwa from Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Sa'di, who died, I think, 1954. So he must have issued the fatwa before that, and since then we have so many, and including these institutions. The general agreement by the dominant majority is that it is possible. Organ transplantation during life and after death. With some conditions and restrictions. For instance, the consent of the person, whether if he is alive, if he died before his death, or his family should disagree. No financial gain in the must be donation. People shouldn't benefit. The human body cannot be the subject of a contract, financial contract. You cannot say, I give you my kidney for 80,000, or this cannot happen. So there are some conditions. One of them is that the organ is not a reproductive organ, because this will affect the lineage. Like, for instance, the example I gave about the testicles. The testicles are the factory which produces the sperms, which have the 23 chromosome that will be transferred to the child. This means that if we transplanted the testicle into a married person, the sperms coming from the testicles are not his. They are coming from someone else, and this person is not related to the woman through marriage. So the woman here is impregnated by someone else than her husband. And this will make troubles in the lineage. That's why they prohibited reproductive organs. The same for the ovary. If we transplant an ovary, the eggs, and I mean by the eggs here coming from the woman, not the chicken eggs. So the eggs are not produced by the wife. It will be produced by a foreign woman. So she will not be the mother, the biological mother in this regard. So that's why they cross this out. Other organs, the majority said it's possible as long as the conditions I mentioned are okay. Yeah? Shall we go now to the beginning of, yes, please. Yes.
So with respect to some of the information that you have provided, it's like,
Huh.
I keep thinking about, okay, what about medical advances that remove the reason? For
That?
example, in the case that you've mentioned,
Huh.
where like the genetic material that is moved from one individual
Another.
to another,
Yes.
maybe in 50 years that it may be possible to adjust for that. So if that happens, would the fatwa need to change? Do these institutions already have mechanisms that would
In general, yes, of course. In general, the fatwa would change if the situation changes. But I cannot imagine medical advances that will change that. So if you transfer the DNA, then you transfer the DNA. Ah.
for physicians, like these are like you can always look at the new technologies such as CRISPR
Yes.
highly reliant. So such problem, like every
Yes.
few years that we get
No, the general answer is yes, of course. And these opinions are changeable because they are based on ijtihad, on independent reasoning, etc. So, and they say most of the time when the introductory of the conference that this is what we reached for now. If anything happened, we will convene again, etc. And we have some examples, although few, till now, that they changed. Like for instance, the IVF, in vitro fertilization, assisted reproductive technologies. They had a fatwa on IVF in a polygamy context. Someone who is married to 2 wives. So this is not a discussion about polygamy. It has nothing to do with gender now. It's bioethics. So we will not discuss the polygamy. We discuss the case. Polygamy, someone who is married to 2, and it happened that the 2, they love each other very much, and they want to help each other. So one of them has problems with the eggs, producing the eggs, and one of them has problems with the uterus. So the one who produces the eggs, the one who has the uterus said, I will help you. Just fertilize the eggs through my husband, and I will carry till a term, till the delivery. Is this possible or not? In the beginning, they said it's possible because it's all within marriage. We know the father, the husband, and both are related to the person through marriage. And the mother is the biological mother, the one who is providing the eggs. So where is the problem? And they issued the fatwa in this way. After, I think, 2 years, they convened again and they retracted the fatwa and they said, also, this is not possible. And for purely scientific reasons, because physicians came with some examples in which the biological mother that we think will be the mother will not even be the biological mother. The one who will give the fertilized egg to the co-wife, it's possible that this fertilized egg will not develop into a pregnancy, and this happens many times without being aware even that this happens. And it can happen, although rarely, but it can happen that this surrogate mother normally will have her own egg fertilized by her own husband, and she will become pregnant, but not of the eggs of her co-wife, but by her own self. So we will make a mistake here by giving this child to the one who is not the mother, even biologically. So, of course, you can do this now by DNA testing and stuff like this. I think personally, this is not a good thing and shouldn't be done because we don't have here one marital contract. We have different marital contracts. Polygamy is multiplicity of marriages, not multiplicity of wives. So this one who has different women, there are walls between these women with different marital contracts. So they should be treated independently. And you cannot cross this that easily as we think. Plus, of course, social justice. We know that what will happen with the second wife who will come as a surrogate mother, usually a poor girl coming who needs the money, you marry with her, you get the child, and then she goes home. So there is huge potential for misuse, etc., in which some people will be privileged and others, and only the rich people will be able to have children. So many things. These were not mentioned in the new fatwa, but the point I want to say, science sometimes, developments in science and more information in science can change the fatwa. Yeah? Yes?
I would like to ask about, do you think that collective ijtihad is more powerful than individual ijtihad? We know that ijtihad is zanni and collective ijtihad is not ijma,
Yeah.
it's not qat'i, but maybe more powerful than individual ijtihad.
I think so in principle, and the people who write about this, even the religious scholars who participate in these discussions, they think that collective ijtihad is more safe. You are on the more safe side when you have collective ijtihad. The more brains you have on the table, the closer you are to the truth. In general. But there is no infallibility. There is no isma.
So what do you think about the responsibility? In supervisor or müşteri takes the responsibility himself. But here, where is the responsibility?
Responsibility is in the institution. It's in the name of the institution. The fatwa is coming out in the name of the institution. Not but of course people sign. So they have also their own responsibility, but the collective responsibility is an institutional one. Yeah. Okay. I will go quickly about the beginning of human life. Beginning of human life is one of the big questions that have always based the minds of people who think about medical ethics, not only in the modern time, but also in the pre-modern time. I'll give you a quick example about this thing, beginning of human life. Of course, abortion. If we terminate pregnancy, are we killing a person? So is it homicide? Or are we abstaining life from coming into existence? Morally speaking, they are totally different things. You can say both are immoral, but they are not from the same level. Killing a human being is something, and if we say terminating potential human life is something else. So people were busy. Hippocratic Oath spoke about abortion. But in the modern time, we will have new questions. As I mentioned with the printed version and the digital version, we used to think of pregnancy, of the embryo inside the uterus only. And that's why it was called, in Arabic, it's janin. In Arabic, we don't have this differentiation between embryo and fetus, 4 weeks and after 4 weeks. This is a medical thing. In Arabic, it's janin. And janin literally means the hidden, unseen. It's something in the mother's belly, and we cannot see it. Now, it's not janin anymore. First of all, we can see it. You go to the physician, you see on the screen, you hear the heart beating and all this stuff from early days of pregnancy. But we can have it also outside with the IVF. We can have the egg, we can have the sperm, we do the artificial insemination, and then we have the embryo in front of us for days. So we have it outside. Now that we have it outside, we can do so many things with it. We can do research on it, like stem cell research. We'll extract the stem cells, which will, between brackets, kill the embryo, but we get the cells that we want in order to conduct the research. We can screen the embryos in order to see the embryos that carry genetic diseases. We exclude them and we choose the right ones, etc. World of options are open because it's not hidden anymore. It's seen, observable, and we have it outside. So the question here, what to do with the classical discussions about the beginning of human life in the pre-modern medical ethics, and how far the new scientific discoveries will impact these pre-modern discussions. In 1985, this organization in Kuwait organized this very important conference about beginning and end of human life. It's, I think, more than one-page book. The champion of the discussions in this one was this gynecologist, Hassan Hathout. Hassan Hathout came with the thesis that what happened in pre-modern Islamic medical ethics has no relevance anymore. We should go away with it. The information on the table now are completely new, shift-making. Pre-modern religious scholars had no idea, so we have to think freshly now. He said that life does not begin with ensoulment. You know ensoulment, nafkh al-ruh? It's a concept in the Islamic tradition that, do you have this one? Can you go to this one and have a look, please? This is a hadith, prophetic tradition, mentioned with various versions in Bukhari, Muslim, so many. There is hardly any discussion about its authenticity. Only the Mu'tazila in the beginning, they raised some questions about its authenticity. But anyhow, according to this tradition, it speaks about three main stages of embryonic development in the uterus. Nutfa, 40 days. Alaqa, 40 days. Mudgha, 40 days. 340 days, gradual. After the 340s, which will be 120, isn't it? Your math is okay? So 40 plus 40 plus 40, 120. So after 120, the angel will be sent by God to breathe the soul into the embryo, so we will have a human being. So ensoulment was a borderline. And religious scholars used to speak abortion before ensoulment, abortion after ensoulment. Hassan Hathout said, this will not work. This will not work. Ensoulment is metaphysical. Something we cannot see.
Okay.
Metaphysical, غيبي, علم الغيب, something that only God knows about it. And this, we were using this because also the embryo was also hidden. Now it's not hidden anymore. We have it, we see it, we even manipulate it, we can do even surgeries for the embryo, etc. So we should use a different point, starting point for human life. What is this starting point for human life? This is fertilization, the moment of fertilization. Why? Because before the moment of fertilization, sperm alone can never be a human being because it's only 23 chromosomes. Egg alone can never be a human being, it's 23 chromosomes. Only when we have the 46, this can be a human being. So this is the moment of the beginning of human life. So we have to revise everything that we studied before in Islam about beginning of human life and take this as the borderline, the very moment of conception, the fertilization moment, and say that before and after. Very similar, by the way, to the Catholic position, which was adopted in 1983 because more or less of the same very arguments. And sometimes I think Hathout was influenced by these discussions because he was running a Dawah center in California in which he was very much engaged with Catholic partners, etc. So maybe. But anyhow, so this was his position. So what he tried to do is medicalization, the beginning of human life. That go away with the metaphysical science, العلامات الغيبية, and he said, don't listen to any scientist who tell you that ensoulment can be linked to embryonic developments and can be discovered by science. He says, anything in this line is folklore. This is not science. From the beginning of pregnancy till the end, we don't have a moment which says, oh, here something strange happens and should be the ensoulment. He says this does not happen. From day one in pregnancy, we have the full, he says, we have the full genetic code of the human being that will be born. So from day one, of the moment of fertilization, we have the ears, we have the eye, we have the heart, we have all the cells, but they are not matured yet. They are still in the first plastocism thing. So we have the human being, but it didn't flesh out. That's it. So all what happens during pregnancy is not gradual development, it's maturation. And this is two very different perspectives. If you say that we have something that grows and grows and grows, then the moral standing of this thing will differ. The more it grows, the higher status it will have. But if you say everything goes there, but at the molecular level, and all what happens is that you start to see it. But nothing comes in a sudden. It was there from day one. This is a different perspective. And then he would call also some statements, references in the Quran, etc. Like for instance, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ نُطْفَةٍ. And he says, insan, what's insan? This is a human being. Quran calls it insan in the very stage of nutfa, which is stage 1. So the Quran itself calls it a human being, etc., etc. So many things. His argument, how was it supported? This is the traditional reading. Nutfa 40 days, then, if you see here the text, the one in red, You have the 3 stages separated by the term then, thumma in Arabic. So it's plus 40 plus 40 plus 40 will be 120. Some of the religious scholars who was convinced by the position of Hathut, he said that we can make a metaphorical translation for this hadith to accommodate the position that human life starts by day 1. How? He said this will work if we understand thumma as then. But is this the only meaning of thumma? Of then? When I say I had lunch, then I started, then I gave the lecture. It means 2 separate incidents. One finished and the other one started. I didn't do them together. But I give the lecture and drink coffee. They happen parallel at the same time. They can. It didn't work, but sometimes it does. So and then are different. Then, which is thumma, one incident finishes, the other follows. Wa or fa can happen parallel. Thumma in Arabic can mean then, but it can also mean and or fa. And then he would use references in the Quran, speaks about nutfa, alaqa, and mudgha. Sometimes it's thumma and sometimes it's fa. So he said that it can be fa. So if it is wa or fa, then it will be read like this. 40 days nutfa and 40 days alaqa and 40 days mudgha. So the total is not 120. The total is 40. It's just 40. Huh? And breathing the soul also happens in the 40s. And highly possible in the first day of the 40 when everything starts. So it will be day 1. This is Abdul Qadir al-Ammari, a Yemeni religious scholar who participates. And this is again the power of knowledge. When the scientists convince you, you will try to find a way in order to accommodate that. This didn't work for the majority of the religious scholars. And he didn't get the support of more than Abdul Qadir al-Ammari. All the religious scholars did not accept this position. And they did not accept this position because of another scientist who was a neurologist, Mukhtar al-Mahdi. Mukhtar al-Mahdi said it's not true that pregnancy from day 1 till the last day are always the same, and there is nothing strange that happens which we cannot link to ensoulment. He said it's not true at all. Science, neurology tells us that things happen, strange things happen during pregnancy which we can link to the incident of ensoulment. He said, what is the function of the soul? One of the main functions of the soul is cognition, idrak. I am a living, so I know I am Mohammed, this is Mu'taz, this is Mukhtar, I'm in a winter school. All this happens because I'm a living person. I'm aware of myself and the world around me. He said in the beginning of the pregnancy, the brain is not developed in the embryo. And any acts coming from the embryo are not well thought. It's like when I hit my body in like, for instance, in this table, I will do like that without thinking, unthought. But if I'm raising my hand like this, try to influence you, I don't know what, these are well thought movements. He says what happens in a specific moment during pregnancy is that the child starts to be aware of that and will react differently. So when the child will hear the voice of the father or the mother, will react differently than hearing noise in the street. Yes. Which means that there is cognition, that he or she is aware of himself or herself and the world around, etc. And he appended his paper with list of sources in English. This is again the negotiation of power knowledge and knowledge power. Religious scholars will not do not read the English. Why are you appending your paper with English sources? To impress them. To say that you see all these English sources, and he is mentioning in the paper the most updated and I don't know what, they are saying what I'm saying now. Because his colleague is saying this is not science, this is folklore. Here, the two scientists, it's like negative plus negative means positive. So they excluded each other. in the authority of science. Because a religious scholar said, look, this is not science. If there is real science, you shouldn't disagree with each other to this extent. We, jurists, we disagree with each other because we work with words, which can be read differently, metaphorical, literal, but you work with the most advanced apparatuses, you have microscopes, etc., and still you disagree. So, okay, what should we do? We put this aside because this is a matter of probability, your science, and we cannot judge. We use our own tools, go back to the texts, scripture, see what the Quran says and the Sunnah about ensoulment, and then we come to a conclusion. But we will not ignore science completely, because what both scientists agree about is that there is life, and the embryo is growing. And it is not true that some religious scholars in the past thought that it is an accumulated piece of blood, that it is an extra finger in the mother, till the moment of ensoulment, and then everything will come. It does not happen like this. It's 46 chromosome, it grows, matures, etc. So we will say before ensoulment there is life, but it's not human life. It's like life in animals, life in plants, life which has its own dignity and respect, but this is not human life. Human life is ensoulment. What makes us humans is our souls. And our souls is a metaphysical, which we can know only through the Quran and Sunnah, not through science. Because science is not about the soul. So having the soul on the table, it changed the whole thing. But having also science on the table excluded some of the old opinions. Like, for instance, some religious scholars would say you can always abort before ensoulment, or at least in the first 40 days. Why? I'm not ready to be a father. I don't feel ready. I want to take some time. I'm not ready to be a mother now. So we want to abort. You will say yes, okay. The woman is worried about her slim figure. She will become fat if she got pregnant. Can she abort? You say yes, you can. Why? Any reason. Without reason even. Why? Because there is no life. It's a piece of blood, you can throw it. No problem. They said these opinions must be excluded now because there is life. There is life. So abortion can be done only if there is a valid reason. What makes reason valid? We can negotiate. For instance, genetic diseases, multiple disabilities, financial problems of the couple, of the country, healthcare infrastructure, etc. We can think about it. Rape, whatever. Adultery, we can think about it. But there must be a good reason for abortion. After ensoulment, everything remained as it is. The only reason to do abortion will be that the life of mother is in danger. Not the health, the life of mother is in danger. And we have to choose. Then we have an actual life, that's of the mother, and potential life, that's of the embryo. Then we give preference to the life of the mother.
But that's between the first 40 days, not the 120?
After 120.
So they still come back to the first
120, yes.
Okay.
Yes. By the way, I finished. So if you have any questions.
Doctor, what's your position when the end of beginning of?
I agree with the conclusion that before 120 is something different than after 120. What I slightly disagree with is that before 120, they always think about medical reasons most of the time, that we have genetic diseases. I would say it's much broader than that.
For example, Down syndrome.
They didn't mention Down syndrome, they just gave some general characteristics about that. Like, for instance, it's a very serious one, it's incurable, it will shorten the life of the child, will live for a very short time with so many complications, suffering for the parents, pain for the child, etc. So I don't think that Down syndrome would fall into that. The ones who made a list of the diseases that will apply to the fatwas of their religious scholars are the physicians in Iran. There are some physicians in Iran who came up with a list of diseases for the embryo that will justify abortion. the list must be updated very regularly because some of incurable become curable in just weeks or months, etc. But I would say it's not only the medical condition, but the condition of the couple also, and the condition of the society they are living in. I wouldn't judge the situation for a couple who have 5 children with disabilities like the couple who do not have children at all and they want to have a child. I wouldn't judge the situation of a couple who are living now in Yemen or Syria like the one who are living here in Qatar, etc., etc. It's a very complex issue, and you should consider so many factors, not just the medical condition. Otherwise, it will be medicalization again.
How about if you have twins or more, one is with defect, the other is perfectly fine?
Yeah. I don't know if they can abort one and leave the other. It depends on the. But then you will have the same reasoning.
Selective.
Yeah, you will have the same reasoning under what conditions you can do this abortion. Yes?
So what do you think about the Hanafi's criteria?
Mhm.
The being khilqa, shaping the body parts?
That's why some scholars spoke about 40 days, because they said after 40 days you have takhliq. They take the human shape. They take the human shape. But now we know that having characteristics of human shape happens even before that. You hear the heart beating before 40 days. So heart is beating before 40 days. Yeah. So all these things will change also.
Ibn Abidin said it is 120 days.
Yes, Ibn Abidin is one of but he criticized the religious scholars who thought that movement, shape, ensoulment, and life, everything happens after 120. He questioned that. He said that what we see in the eggs of chicken, and this is really chicken and this stuff, it doesn't happen all at the same time. There are developments and shapes before. Yes?
Was there a problem with Fuqaha going to physicians to decide the matter that ensoulment, this is a metaphysical
Yes.
issue, and we would rely on kalam, not on medicine. So why, I mean, I can see they could have input, but like you do tafsir of the hadith and like
Yes.
easy expert. So how is it?
Metaphysical concepts, when it comes to fiqh, should be linked to something observable, like death. It's also metaphysical that the soul leaves the body. Huh? How do we know that the soul leaves the body? It's metaphysical. And we don't have scripture telling us when. We had scripture telling us when in the beginning. But in the end of human life, we don't have. So they link this to amaratul maut, physical signs of death. So it's not new that you link the metaphysical concept to practical issues.
This is for
It's possible, yeah, yes. And sometimes metaphysical issues are not counted. Like, for instance, karamat al-awliya. Miraculous acts of the saints. Religious scholars, they recognize it. So they say one who is in the east, his wife in the west. She said, I'm impregnated by my husband. Miraculously. Do you deny miracles of saints? They say no. Okay, should we consider this? They say no, we cannot consider this. Why? Because these metaphysical issues cannot be measured. They are not consistent. So they cannot be part of a consistent system. Yeah? With all respect to saints, of course. Any other questions? Yes?
Yes, I've just,
Can we take the questions all at the same time so that we can finish? Yeah? please.
I've just a general question, not regarding only these topics, but in general, how should we deal with the plurality of opinions and reasons? I mean, in fact, when you are Muslims living in Europe or in Qatar or in Syria, everything we hear in the mosque, okay, you have to consult a mufti, you go to the alim, you go to the sheikh. Questioning myself, okay, who is an alim, who is a sheikh, to whom shall we go? How can we choose the right opinion for our life? As you said, the circumstances are really different, and one has to understand my situation, feelings, emotions, and so
So it's
on.
about the plurality of
And how we
opinions. Okay, I think the plurality here doesn't differ greatly from physicians. who can give you different diagnoses, and then you have to visit more than one, and you make up your mind, etc. I see the fiqh as a moral project. The whole fiqh as a moral project. I want to achieve the will of God. Sometimes I know myself. You don't have to ask anyone. You know what's good and what's bad. You don't have to be specialist in Islamic studies to know it. Sometimes you go to the mufti to overcome this feeling. You see the life fatwas, when people ask the mufti, you can see it sometimes, especially with couple. A woman would come, or a man would come and ask the mufti, my wife did that and that, and of course he will explain it. He is married with Iblis, a very bad woman. So that the mufti will give him what he is looking for. And then he made the mistake in the formulation, and the mufti said, you are wrong. He will say, no, you misunderstood my point. I didn't mean that. It's like that, it's like that. Till he gives him what he's looking for. After a few minutes, the wife will call and says, I am the wife of this husband. And what he said is that and that. It's a scene that you can see. This is not a moral project. You don't have an ethical dilemma and you try to find a solution for it. You want to live nominally according to Islam, but factually according to your own will. You are not following the will of God. You made up your decision and you need someone to justify this decision. This happens most of the time, what we see in the media, it's the political leaders and etc. But it happens at the individual level, much more than the political leaders. You need someone to justify your act. This is what Al-Shatibi says, من يرجع إلى الشريعة استظهارا. You go only nominally back to Sharia. But in fact, you are following your own mind. And maybe your decision is right, religiously speaking. But you don't care. You need someone to tell you that you are right. So this is one thing. The other thing about the iftah is that in our modern age, this is my impression, maybe I'm wrong, we have over hypertension about this issue. Every single issue, we ask about it. I don't remember, do we have a collection of fatwas of the Prophet, masalan, Sahaba? Where are their fatwas? It seems life was going, and the people could decide for themselves, and they would ask only if there is a real dilemma. Because Islam is we say is the religion of fitrah, and normally what you feel is the right thing. And Dr. Mu'taz is writing now an article about istafti qalbak, this hadith, etc. We have this. So asking too much is also a problem, I would say. And most of the time it is a moral problem, because you want to have justification for a decision you already made. Whether it's confirmed Sharia or not, you don't care about that. But plurality shouldn't be a problem, because still you have your own conscience that will tell you. Okay, shall we stop here, because we are out of time, and tomorrow, inshallah, we still have tomorrow together. Yes.
Regarding dealing with plurality or fatwa pluralism, I would say that the relationship between the Mustafti and Mufti is the trust relationship. So you should explore and do ijtihad yourself at the individual level as much as you can to explore the argument and the justifications of this fatwa or that fatwa, and then at the end there is you should follow the mufti that you trust. There is a trust between you and the mufti. So the relationship is based on is a moral relationship, not just a questioner and the questioner. So it's a moral relationship, and there is a moral responsibility under the individual level. This is the point.
And you trust not only the knowledge, but the conscience, piety.
Exactly. Yeah.
One of the conditions of the mujtahid is at-taqwa, not just knowledge. Thank you so much.